Shalom, and welcome to Challenging Torah, a project of the Malibu Jewish Center and Synagogue. V'yehi miketz shnatayim yamim. At the end of 2 years, miketz. Miketz means finished, the end of the story, or enough already. Joseph has been in the pit for 2 years, and of course the cupbearer forgot about him. We all know the story. And this is necessary in Jewish terms for what we call a yeridah letzorech aliyah. We need to go down into the pit in order to come back up. These have been pivotal years in the pit for Joseph. And we see him go into the pit as this arrogant, beautiful, young 20-something, and come out a couple years later, humbled, changed. He's grown into a mature human being. And so, when the cupbearer suggests to Pharaoh, oh, right, I remember this guy that can tell dreams. When the Pharaoh says, I've had a dream and none of my magicians, no one seems to be able to interpret it properly, he calls Joseph and he tells him the dream. And he says, can you understand a dream to interpret it? And Joseph answers Pharaoh and says, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh a favorable answer. This is the first time we ever really hear Joseph talk about God. There has been an awakening in this time in the pit, in his big time out. And with great humility, Joseph begins to interpret the dream. In the words of Musar, humility is called anavah. And we often have a, distasteful, too humble, not so good. But anavah in these terms means a healthy self-esteem, located somewhere between self-abasement and arrogance. Certainly Joseph up till now has been on the side of arrogance. Why else would he tell his brothers this dream without thinking about what the effect would be? And now he comes to Pharaoh and he says, I don't interpret. God will interpret for me and will be favorable to you. And so Pharaoh tells his dream and he says to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood on the banks of the river, and behold, there came up from the river 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows came up, after them poor and gaunt, and such as I've never seen. And the gaunt cows, the thin cows, ate up the fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, for they were still ill-favored as in the beginning. It's a dream that we could take seriously. Clearly, this is a dream about cycles. And we know many of us in this synagogue have a little card that I give out every couple of years that says Gam ze yavor, which is the wisdom of Solomon that says, this too shall pass, right? We know that we live our lives in cycles, often cycles of 7. And so, in this economic downturn that the United States faced over the last years, and when do we exactly begin so I can know when these 7 years are over, not all that clear. We have a worry of the moment, which is even when the economy recovers, the thin cows will still look gaunt and ill-favored because there will be no jobs. They will survive. The fat cows will have suffered, but to what end? And there's endlessly a cycle in an economic downturn and renewal, but will the thin cows get ahead? This is the question on the table today as we talk about food insufficiency in America. This was a time of famine, and the Pharaoh says to Joseph, I really appreciate this interpretation. In fact, and he urges Joseph, what should I do? And Joseph, perhaps in an arrogant moment, perhaps in that place that humility means, I know when to step up and to serve, tells Pharaoh that he needs to put all of his resources into putting things aside. Maybe he's a technician and knows how to make things not rot. That's what the sages say. And Pharaoh turns and he gives Joseph a new name. He makes him second in his kingdom. He gives him a wife. And Joseph has not only Yerida, gone down into the pit, L'tzorach Aliyah, in order to come up, he's now in a much higher position than he ever was. He's still on the humility, arrogance scale. And he attempts to forget his old life. In fact, he named his children. His firstborn he named Menashe, or Menashe, for God has made me forget my toil and my father's house. Imagine that for your kid's name. And in the second, he calls Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Really, he is torn between loving who he is and trying not to remember who he was. The famine occurs. We know the story. Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt to search for food. The brothers stand in front of him. And for all of the efforts to forget who you are and where you come from, the hurt that's been inside of him leaps in front of his eyes. He's speechless. He doesn't tell them who he is. And now it's the turn of the brothers, who have been holding this guilt the entire time and have never told their father. And Joseph begins to play with them, a cat and mouse game perhaps, as each side finds its equilibrium. Yes, Joseph had a dream his brothers would bow down, and perhaps he needed Benjamin so all of them would bow down. That was the dream and the fulfillment of a dream. But I take it to the place that says Joseph just doesn't quite know what to do yet. And so he toys with them, and eventually he takes Shimon as a hostage, sends them home, and says, "Can't come back until you bring me Benjamin. Is your father still well?" He lives between worlds, and the brothers haven't forgotten. As they say when this happens, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother," referring to Joseph, "for we saw the anguish of his soul, and we did nothing." As the portion ends, we see Joseph weep, we see the brothers consumed by guilt, and we see a father who once again needs to let what he considers his only son, the last son of his beloved Rachel, go down lest everyone starve. And that's when we will put a pause button as we look for light in the darkness. This Hanukkah, let's find our appropriate place on the scale of humility and arrogance as we search with a candle inside of our own being to find out who and what we really are. Shabbat Shalom. Many blessings for Hanukkah season.